Hello, Garland Nixon here. And, all the talk is about the potential of NATO sending troops to Ukraine. Let's talk about that in the context of what recently happened between Iran and Israel. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and let's talk about that. I'm going to touch on just to give you a little bit of background of what I'm thinking, where I'm coming from. I'm going to do a couple of quick articles, right? Let's start here. Here's one. Biden blasts alarming surge of anti-Semitism amid anti-Israel protests at Columbia, right? President Joe Biden blasts recent anti-Israel protests that have been taking place at Columbia University in a statement marking the upcoming Passover holiday. All right, so that's one. And I'm going to give you another article. The second one is similar. It's in a U.S. colony. A powerless, fairly pathetic leadership in Germany. German authorities, and I use the word authorities quite loosely, crackdown on Palestinian conference sparks widespread outrage, right? Okay, why am I doing that? Let's start here. So what we're looking at is a couple of things. Number one of the points that I wanted to make is that the U.S. empire, and in that I include Germany. When I say the U.S. empire, I mean the U.S. and what now is very obvious. It's what are now very obvious vassals, very, very weak, powerless colonies that do what they're told. The U.S. and its vassals are at war with its citizens, right? The people throughout the colonies and in the main state of the U.S. are suffering. Their standards of living is decreasing, and along with it, their future, their hopes, their present, everything's looking bad. So as one of the things Jody Brar talks about, if you're going to take out, she says an imperialism, but if you're going to take on an outside power, right, you've got to muster the troops together. You got to get the people together, and you got to convince them there's an outside power that's threatening something, right? It's threatening your way of life. In order to get people to support you against somebody that they will believe is threatening their way of life, number one, they have to have a way of life that they don't want threatened, right? They have to feel as though they have something to lose. James Baldwin's famous statement, the worst thing a society can create is a man who has nothing to lose, right? So the U.S. empire, through its neoliberal policies, have created generations of people who don't have much to lose, what are they going to defend? If you're going to defend something, are you defending your home? What are you defending, right? And so in order to take on an outside power, such as Russia or China, in order to really get into the fight, at some point, they're going to need the support of the people. Now, don't get me wrong. They could pick the fight and then turn around and say, okay, we got to fight with Russia, China, whoever, and turn around to the American people and say, boy, we got a problem. Let's get together. Time to draft all the young people and send the cannon fodder over, at which time this thing would fall apart. They could wait until after they start the fight and then turn around to the youth who are in the streets opposing the policies of the ruling elite, who are on the college campuses, who are growing in anger, growing in angst, growing in frustration, growing in economic pain, and say to them, okay, unite with us for our fight. We have a fight. We've got to fight with Russia, China, whoever, to which those people would say, what do you mean we? I think the most dangerous thing that could happen would be for the U.S. to pick a fight with Russia or China or whoever, and then turn around to the U.S. and say, okay, we've got to do a draft, because at that point, this thing would collapse. I really believe that this thing would collapse, because what the U.S. has the war. Okay, we started the war with whoever. And now we need cannon fodder. We need young cannon fodder. We need people. We need you guys to get on a ship and head over to wherever to die in the sand or wherever the hell, right? Ain't happening. The people, the young people in America despise the ruling elite, distrust the ruling elite. They want to change the ruling elite. The last thing the ruling elite would be able to do is get a bunch of young people to join the military and go fight for them. That ain't happening. That's not going to happen. And particularly when for instance, if there was a war in the Middle East, well, the authorities throughout the U.S. And its colonies, the U.S. imperial structure, are right now beating the young people mercilessly, arresting them, harassing them, etc., because they're in opposition to our policies in the Middle East, which means they're growing in opposition to our foreign policy everywhere. So what the first issue that the ruling elite will have if they try to create a major war is they must then muster the troops and get the cannon fodder together, and the cannon fodder would revolt. The potential cannon fodder would revolt. They'd say, we're not going to be cannon fodder for that. Number one. Number two, let's talk about the potential for sending something to the Russian border in Ukraine, right? What would it be? What would it look like? Okay, right now, there are a number of reports that the U.S. and NATO is going to send more, pardon me, for yawning. You know, my stream isn't right until I yawn. I'm a yawning kind of person. So, at any rate, so the discussion is sending something right now. What do we know? We know that 3 or 4 months ago, I reported on this. The Germans said we're going to send a tank brigade or something to the infamous. I don't even know how it's pronounced. I think it's the Saviki Gap. I don't know what the hell, whatever. But it was an area where they thought if the Russians were going to attack Europe, they would go through this area, right? Okay. So they said, the Germans said, we're going to send a brigade, a tank brigade. The problem is we don't have all of the troops for the tank brigade, and we don't really have the tanks for the tank brigade. So the plan is to get this thing together by 2027, but we're not sure we're going to have the tanks by 2027. So what are you going to do? If you really believed that the Russians were going to attack, which they don't, well, all that would mean is this. You're going to call them and say, hey, guys, you're going to attack. Can you give us till 2027 until we get this one single brigade of tank brigade together? You know, it's like the continuous, oh, yes, the China, we think we're going to be a war by 2026, 2027, within 3 years, by 2025, fill in the blank, right? Like the Chinese are sitting there on some kind of a timeline, and they're like working with the U.S. Well, we were going to attack you in 6 months, but if you need another 6, yeah, well, I'll tell you what, we'll give you 12. 12 months good, then we'll attack in 12 months, as though there's some kind of a calendar that is controlled by the U.S. empire and its potential adversaries are waiting to attack. Well, the bottom line is this. All of that stuff is nothing but propaganda and narrative building for the people here. I don't think, to be quite frank, I don't think there's an end to it. I don't think they're going somewhere with it. I think it's a stalling technique. And I think additionally, it allows them to keep pilfering the national treasury. But I don't think there's an ultimate plan to it, right? The only ultimate plan in Asia really is to set up the Philippines, Korea, Japan, etc., to be, you know, the Asian version of Ukraine. I think that's the only kind of real plan they have right now, but they don't really have one. So what we know is this. The Germans don't have much. The Germans, what they can send a few troops, but they don't really have any hardware that could threaten Russia on Russia's border. They don't have anything to send. We know that the French talked about doing something. We're going to try to muster a couple of thousand troops, and maybe eventually we can get to 20,000 after, you know, a couple of years or something, or 6 months to a year or whatever. So let's say the Germans can get 4,800 troops that they said would take till 27 to get. Let's say the French could get, they said 2,000. You know, I mean, we're not even getting anywhere near 10,000. The Brits, they can't even get their ships to run. They can't even get equipment to the Middle East. They're a hopeless cause. So let's just say the whole kit and caboodle could get together 10,000 troops. And then what's the U.S. going to do? The U.S. says we're sending military advisors. Meanwhile, The U.S., it being the total lunatics that they are, they're sending some soldiers to Taiwan in what is a symbolic move, right? They're sending a few special forces guys, the Green Berets or whatever, to Taiwan in what is purely symbolic move. It's not like that the people in Taiwan, I mean, like the Chinese army would look over there and say, oh, wow, there's a couple hundred Green Berets. Well, we better not send 150,000 troops to take the island. No, it's symbolism. It's provocations. That's all right now. The empire, U.S. empire, is capable of provocations. That's what it is. It's the empire of provocations. We're going to send some troops to a Chinese island to provoke them. We're going to, right now, the U.S. is doing staging some naval warfare exercises in the South China Sea with the Philippines, where they simulate sinking a Chinese carrier or something. That's all they can do, is simulate it right now. I'm not saying they can't sink a Chinese carrier or whatever, but the reality is this, if you think about it. In order to fight China, they've got to go to the border of China to fight China. China's a superpower. So you got to go to the border of that superpower to fight it, and then put the Philippines and Korea and Japan. Keep in mind something. Both the leaders of both Japan and Korea are looking at less than 30% approval ratings and 70% or above disapproval ratings. 70%. These people are not in any mood to follow their leader into war with China, which of course would be complete and total destruction of their economy, leading to starvation, literal starvation. They'd be like Joe Biden said, his father was eaten or something by cannibals. They'd all be cannibals eating each other in Japan and South Korea, were they to completely disassociate themselves economically from China to a point where they went to war with China. Same with Australia. They'd be cannibals. That would be their only option, to eat each other, because they wouldn't have anything else to eat. They wouldn't have an economy, etc. Which I might add is the U.S. empire's plan, right? To sacrifice them, to do them like they did Ukraine. The plan would be this: Japan, Korea, Australia, they get wiped out. And along with that, China gets severely damaged, right? China severely damaged. All of our so-called allies in the region get annihilated. Therefore, they can't power up China's economy anymore because they can't buy stuff from China. And they're at odds with China because they've been at war with China, blah, blah, blah. Destruction of everything. The whole Asian economy completely wiped out and destroyed. That's the plan here. Wipe out and destroy the Asian economy. Keep in mind, plan A. That's plan B. Plan A is to wipe out and destroy the European economy. But you've got to go to China's border to fight that fight. And right now, you got to go to Russia's border with a ragtag group of soldiers that don't want to fight, that are unarmed. They're going to go. They don't have their ships either don't have work, or they're in the Red Sea. But little NATO has, they got armadas in the Red Sea. And what they have left would be sitting ducks for hypersonic missiles. So what can they do? I mean, they can threaten, they can mouth off a lot, and they and they can say, okay, we're going to pick a fight with Russia. But if they send troops, they don't have many to send, not enough to make a difference. In a way, here's what I think. In the same way that Iran, think about this, because Russia, Iran, China, these people don't just operate on as a reactionaries, right? They used to say this about George W. Bush. They said on Sunday he decides what he's going to do. No, it was on Monday. George W. Bush decides what he's going to do on Tuesday, and that's what I mean. I'm getting a day. Well, let me do it this way. On Monday, George W. Bush decides what he's going to do on Wednesday, regardless of what happens on Tuesday. So everything could change, but he's going to do it because he already said he was going to do it, right? The Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, they're wise. They use wisdom. So that means they're fluid. As an example, the Iranians said to everyone, look, we've struck the Israelis. If the Israelis do anything, if they breathe on us, just the slightest provocation, we're going to nail them. We're going to let them have it. Okay. And the people thought, holy crap. So what did the Israelis do? They sent some drones that were the equivalent of this like DJI toy behind me. You know, I can fly it around. I can look through the camera, take some pictures, and have fun. Right? It's a toy. Well, they sent a handful of toys, and Iran shot them down. And using wisdom, rather than saying, well, we're locked in, since we said any provocation and we'd attack, that was a provocation, so we have to attack. Iran just laughed it off. They gave him the old brush off my shoulders, right? Iran just said, really, that's supposed to be a provocation. Here's what we're going to do. We're not even going to look at that as rising to the level of a provocation. We're going to say that was funny. That was hilarious. That's really what you're going to do? Yeah, okay, we'll just ignore that, right? Which was wise. They could have been locked in and said, we've got to fight back. Oh, we said the slightest provocation, that was the slightest provocation. But the truth is this: Iran's going to act in a defensive manner. And they saw that as for what it was, a symbolic attack on Iran, so that the Western media could all say, oh my God, they attacked, Israel attacked Iran. Israel could say to its people and its rabid crazies, hey, we let Iran have it, man. We fired missiles, drones, excuse me. Sorry, I'm yawning. We did the same thing to them that they did to us. They fired drones and missiles and we fired them right back, right? Iran was like, okay. They did what I just did. They yawned. Oh, okay. Yeah, see it. Bye. Okay. I think the Russians, while they say, look, you send any troops and it's going to be all hell's going to break loose in Ukraine, I think the Russians are similar. I think the Russians understand, and this is what the Ukrainians understand. My dad used to always say this: you got to know when to take a win. Too many people don't know how or when they're not able to take a win. When you have a win, take it and walk with it. Ukrainians had a win. They slapped the bejesus out of the Israelis. And they were sitting, everybody was looking at them. People were in awe of their technological and military prowess. The U.S. empire was looking ragged and weak, and they had a win, the biggest win ever for Iran. And when Israel tried to throw a couple of quadcopter drones in, Iran looked at it and said, we got to win. We ain't screwing that up. We're going to walk with the win. We're good. Right? No need to react. It doesn't rise to the level of a threat, which the truth of the matter is it didn't rise to the level of a threat. So they were wise. They were fluid. I can do this. I can do that. I can tell you, if you do this, I'll do that. And then you do something that doesn't rise to the level, I'll say, nah, that ain't enough. That ain't enough. I can change my mind anytime I want to. I can subject myself to a particular standard and says, if A happens, B will happen. And you can say, okay, I'm going to do A. And then I can evaluate A and say, yeah, dude, nah, that ain't getting it done. You're going to have to do more than that if you want to elicit a response from me. Very, very wise. I think the Russians are the same. You know, I was on Galloway, and one of the discussions was, the Ukrainians are getting money here. They're going to get some missiles. They're going to go after the Kerch Bridge. They're going to try to hit, some internal places in Moscow. In other words, will these provocations rise to a level that Moscow will adjust its strategy, will clamp down, will hit harder, will strike back at a NATO country, will do something like that? I think you saw the answer with Iran. I believe that these, we'll call them all axis of resistance powers. Iran, include Russia and China, etc. I think these axis of resistance powers are coordinating their responses. I think they understand that the U.S. empire has been reduced to the level of the empire of provocations. That's all they can do. They can't launch a military attack on Russia of any consequence. Yeah, could they fire some missiles at Russia? Yes. Could they send airplanes in? Yes. But they take a licking. Man, all of their bases in the European theater would be destroyed, quickly. In the Pacific theater, Russia certainly has Pacific assets that it could hit their bases. So it would be very costly. It would be extremely costly to do that. They don't have the ground power. They don't have the ground and pound stuff, right? One thing has been made obvious in Ukraine, and that is that Russia is still set up to fight a ground war. They're still able to fight a ground war. And let's face it, to win a war, some point you got to get on the ground. So Russia's able to fight a ground war. The U.S. is not able to fight a ground war. It doesn't have the troops nor the motivation. It doesn't have the people at home who are willing to take the casualties. It doesn't have the equipment, because the equipment has steadily been fed into Ukraine and torn to shred. NATO, European, all the equipment in the European theater. You've got a number of countries that don't have much of anything left. They've sent everything to Ukraine. And they'll just say, we don't have anything left to send to Ukraine, which means they don't have anything to send for Ukraine to fight, and they don't have anything to send for their soldiers to fight also. So Russia's in a position where they know the U.S. empire, NATO, is not in a position to fight a ground war, particularly were they ever on Russia's border? Not in a lot of years. So to go to Russia's border where Russia can fire surface-to-surface missiles from inside its airspace, can fire all kinds of stuff from inside its own airspace, is going to be difficult. To go to the border, I always say this, to go to the border of a superpower and fight a superpower is suicidal. So I think what Russia is sitting there understanding that more provocations are on the way, that all this is going to do, they can buy some whatever's left of the Storm Shadow missiles, the Taurus missiles, whatever kind of missiles. And those are, I say this not in a way to belittle the pain that's caused on the Russian people by strikes into civilian areas, right? But I'll use this term, pinprick strikes. I don't mean pinprick strikes in that they don't cause any pain and heartache, because the Russian people, when you hit a city and you hit a mall and you kill some people, yes, that's not a pinprick to the people that are being hit. But from the perspective of a military confrontation, if you got guys on the lines and they're fighting it out, and some guy takes a missile that could be used to attack Russian lines, and he flies over the Russian lines and he hits a friggin' mall in Belgorod, that ain't helping the cause. It's not helping the cause. And in fact, it implies something. It implies that the West already knows there's nothing they can do to help the cause. They know right now there's nothing they can do to help. They won't say that to the people here, but they know there's nothing they can do to deal with the military domination of Russia. Therefore, they're trying these provocations and pinprick attacks, hoping and praying that it will somehow distract Russia, and Russia will give them some more time or do something outlandish that, allows them to go on another one of those narrative-driven public relations tours of how evil Russia is. I don't know what that's supposed to accomplish, but that's all they know how to do, right? So the best they can do right now is attacks that are non-military. I mean, these attacks, when you attack a civilian, these are non-military. These aren't even civilian infrastructure that is of military note. It's not like they're saying, okay, the Russians use this highway to transport tanks, so we're going to blow up the highway. This train track, so we're going to blow up the train track. Nah, it's firing some rounds into a mall or something in Belgorod region or something like that. That's generally what they're doing. And that's a couple of things. Number one, I think that Zelensky has a bunch of mad Nazis around him, and he needs to keep them happy, and so they won't cut his head off. And every now and then he's got to go because they want to kill Russians. We must kill the Russians. We hate the Russians, right? He can keep them happy by just killing some random Russians every now and then, right? That's to keep them off of his back. They also get to do a provocation, hoping that they can force the Russians to abandon the current plan that's working so well, which I don't think is going to happen. Keep in mind, I've said this, my position all along, my position has been the same. This is a country that absorbed what? 30 million, upwards of 30 million casualties, cities burned. This is a country that in the past have burned their own cities, right? They burned their own wheat and grain and things like that. It's just so that the enemy couldn't get it. So this is a country in Russia that is ready and able to absorb a punch to win a fight, to win the fight. They understand the fight is long term. And if I got to take a punch, I'll take a punch. And I'm going to throw a punch when I can throw a punch, but I'm in the fight. We're going to fight. I think you'll get tired before I will. Oh, by the way, you're on my border and I'm defending my home. So I'm more motivated than you. So come on in. Let's continue to fight. Let's see who gets tired first. Oh, here's a hint. Historically, it ain't going to be me. So the Russians are in it. It doesn't matter if this war goes on for another year. If this is another version of the 100-Year War, Russians ain't backing up out of this one. And of course, as we've seen, one of the things that the war has done is convince some other powers, such as China, that the U.S. is maybe more dangerous than they've considered, is more aggressive and assertive than they've considered. And so there are a lot of countries who are climbing on the bandwagon with Russia, particularly at this. Russia appears to be winning, and everybody loves a winner. So there's a lot of countries now that are going to say, hey, Russia can defeat the United States. Russia's more powerful than, that's what they're looking at it. That's what they're thinking. Russia's more powerful than the United States. Russia can defeat the United States. And I would make this argument on its border. It is. We could talk about the rest of the world. That's a whole nother conversation. On its border, Russia's as on China's border. China's more powerful than anybody. You take a superpower protecting their border. That's a very powerful entity to have to come, to have to breach, particularly when you go to the border of a superpower, the people in the superpower feel threatened, and the people now support the government, and they all come together and say, okay, we got to protect ourselves. The Mongol hordes are coming back to get us, right? So right now, I don't have a tremendous fear of NATO troops going into Ukraine, because I think what little troops go into Ukraine will be symbolic. Right now, they're saying, NATO's doing a couple things. They're saying we've already got troops in Ukraine, but they're in our embassies there. That's nothing the Russians don't know, right? And the Russians are looking at it, I think, from this perspective. Look, here's how I think about it. That ain't a bad thing. Hear me out. You approach me, we get in a fight and I win. Okay. It was me, mano a mano. I won. I can say Joe Blow attacked me and we went at it and I knocked him on his butt, right? What happens if you bring your buddies? Garland, I'm here. It's me, Joe Blow. I brought Bill and Ted and, whatever, Art and Joe and Frank. And I say, okay, look, I don't want any trouble, but you've come to my yard. You need to leave my yard. And they say, we ain't leaving. In fact, we're moving in. We're bringing our stuff. And I say, guys, if you don't get out of my yard, we're going to have to dance. And they say, we ain't doing it. Let's see what we're going to do. So now I get in the Art and Joe and Frank and everybody, and I fight the whole kit and caboodle of you. Kick all of your butts and throw you out on the street. That's a much more significant victory than just beating up you till you came to my yard, isn't it? So what they have done, in what NATO has done, is given is in the process of doing, is giving Russia, they're building the victory that Russia is going to enjoy. They're making it bigger and bigger and bigger, right? At first, it was like, we're going to arm Ukraine. Ukraine's going to fight Russia. And Russia's like, down goes Ukraine. They're like, oh, my God, there goes the army. Okay, we'll build a second army. There you go, Russia. Down goes Army 2. Okay, you sons of bitches, we're going to get you now, Russians. Here's Army 3. Down goes Army 3, right? Now they're saying, well, we got to add more missiles and we got to add more people and we got to add this, add that. And Russia's like, bring it on, dude. What else you got? Keep on sending it. Then, all the wonder weapon. Hey, we're going to send in M777 howitzers. Russia says, send them in. We can blow them up. Okay, we're sending them M1 Abrams tanks. Yeah, Russia's like, yeah. And could you get a few more Leopards while we're at it, and some Challenger tanks? Send them all. So in go the Leopards, in go the Challenger tanks, in go. And Russia's now like, do you have any F-16s? Send them. Doesn't matter at this point. We're kind of ready for this thing. We understand how this is going. You send in your weapons. We demonstrate the fallibility of said weapons, right? They're making this victory much more pronounced for Russia by sending more stuff. All they keep doing is throwing good money for bad. They've lost. And so they send, Joe, you come in here and help me jump on Garland. Joe jumps on Garland too. Whap, 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 down goes Joe. And now at some point, Garland's like, well, I've beaten up everybody that you've sent. You got anybody else? No. Well, then now it's time to leave. And everybody looks at Garland and says, man, that Garland's a bad dude. He just, the old, whatever, Fred came with him and all his whole crew, his community, his neighbors, his buddies, his cousins, his family. They all came to Garland's yard and they confronted Garland on his front porch. And Garland kicked every one of their asses and sent them back home. And went back in and sat down and drank a cup of tea and kept watching 2.5 Men, which is a pretty funny show, I might add. So that's where Russia's sitting. They're like, as odd as it may seem, the more belligerent NATO gets, the more equipment they send, the more troops they send in, the bigger whipping they get. And now, what happened in the context of the Iranian attack on Israel changes the whole game. Because here's the bottom line. Everybody, you don't think the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians were coordinating. You don't think the Russians were looking at what they were doing. You think these entities have not been coordinating on strategies and various data about the U.S. War capabilities. So they all got together and the U.S. finally got a chance to test this stuff out, right? They're like, okay, let's lock all of these computers together in this big network. We've got Arleigh Burke class destroyers, whatever the hell that is. We've got the Aegis system, David Sling, which is just a version of Patriots, but we've got all of these systems with all of these scary, powerful names. And we're going to bring them all together. And we're going to show that the Iranians are weak. And they brought them all together. And what it demonstrated was not that the Iranians are weak, or not that the Iranians are strong. It's that the nature of aerial power has changed. That's all. That what you put together was an air defense system that was focused on large, high-flying, powerful targets, right? If the Iranians had brought in a bunch of planes and the planes were going to come down and bomb Israel, they'd have been the West had been in good shape, because that's what their air defense is set to deal with. However, the Iranians just simply figured out, which wasn't hard, I might add, how to defeat the air network, right? Not how to defeat any particular facet of the air defense, the layered air defense network. Not just we're going to take out David Sling or Iron Dome or whatever. They saw it as one. We've got this one network. And here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to address the network. We'll get them to turn this on. We'll get this. We'll send these in, which blah, blah, blah. And they had a strategy. And so they addressed the U.S. empire's integrated air defense system strategically as an entire entity. And they easily defeated it. And they didn't have to use their newest and bestest technology. They used their stuff they had laying around. And the message was clear. And that is, Iran, you think you can't deal with the Houthis. You don't want a piece of this, right? And there was a bigger message there. And here was the message. The message is one that scales upwards, okay? You're fooling with the Houthis and they're kicking you in the teeth. You don't want a piece of Iran, right? You're fooling with Iran and they're kicking you in the teeth. You don't want to move up to Russia and China. See what I mean? If you can't, I'm going to send in my light guy here. I'll send in my little guy to kick your ass. I don't even have to send in the heavy equipment here. I'll send in my little friend. He'll kick your ass. What if you come to Garland's front porch? You're like, ha, Garland, I'm going to kick your butt. And Garland says, really? You're going to kick my butt? Yeah, here's what I'm going to do. Let me call my 10-year-old son out here. Billy, yeah, come out here. We got this asshole on the front porch. Kick his ass. Billy comes out and he just beats you within an inch of your life. And I say, there really wasn't necessary. I could send Billy out to do my light work. If you come back with some of your other boys, we'll move up to my 12-year-old son next. And we'll keep going until it gets to me. But right now, I don't need to fight you because you're weak. You just don't have it going on, right? Okay, that's what's happening. The lesser powers in the, let's call it a worldwide axis of resistance against the U.S. empire, the lesser powers are demonstrating that they can defeat U.S. military capabilities. Why? Because the game has changed. because you're using a catapult against a cannon, right? The game has changed. And it's interesting because it happened organically. What happened was you built all of these big expensive planes and all of these big expensive things and missiles to use that could easily defeat your enemy and at the same time make a very handsome profit for the military industrial complex, right? So there you've got this manned air force. Well, you know what? Iran can't get they don't have the money for these planes, and they can't get these planes, so they can't have a manned air force. So all they can do is build something cheaper. So they build what they can. Well, we'll build an unmanned air force. And look at air force, you're calling them drones, it's their air force. Iran has an air force, kamikaze drones, right? Whatever you want to call them, we use the term drones. All they are is they're aerial assault vehicles, we'll call them, right? And some have people in them and some don't require people in them. And what Iran realized is we can't fight you using the ones with people in them, so we'll make real cheap ones with no people in them, and we'll send those at you, and we'll layer. See, in the same, think about this. Let me put it this way. In the same way that the U.S. empire had a layered air defense network, right? It's a layered air defense network, right? You have the big radar stations that look far. Then you have things that, you have small air defense systems that, only address something 1 or 2 kilometers or 5 or 6, 9 kilometers out, right? So you have a layered air defense, big, smaller, smaller, smaller. They're networked. The computers choose which to attack and all of that. So what Iran did was this, quite simple. You have a layered air defense network. They had a layered attack network, right? So they're saying, okay, you've got a layered air defense network. You've got this gets down to the close-in stuff, right? So what we'll do is we'll send a layered attack. We'll send drones that are smaller, missiles behind those, cruise missiles that do various things and have various capabilities, and we will match our layered attack with your layered air defense system, but you've got a problem. The problem is it's much more expensive to produce the attack than it is the defense. In the same way that if you're attacking a city, right, the numbers, the numerical advantage is 3 to 1. If you're attacking dug-in troops, you need 3 to 1 troops to take out the dug-in troops, right? Well, I suspect that when it comes to air defense, that reverses itself. That when you're attacking air defense systems, you don't need as much to take them out. So what Iran did to take out the air defense system, you don't need as many, because the air defense system is regardless of the capabilities of the networked system that you have, in the end, it relies on projectiles. In the end, this system has to track incoming threats. It has to develop firing solutions for these threats. And you got a bigger problem. As a result, when it picks up a missile or whatever, an air defense system, most of them match 2 to 1. So you send a missile, generally they're going to send 2 missiles to take it out, right? In Iran's case, if you send in the real cheap drones, you start overwhelming their numbers. I can send in 300 cheap drones. That means it takes 600 missiles to take them out, right? And some of them are going to get through because they're swarmed. If you ever see, I used to, people know me, I do a lot of boating. And let's say you got your radar on, right? And you'll see sometimes something on a radar. It's like, it'll look like a little cloud. It could be a school of birds. They don't look individual on that radar, because they're too small. The radar cross-section is small, and there's a whole group of them. And so it ends up coming back as one blob, and it's a school of birds. I've seen that where I've been in radar, and you're running along in the fog, and you're like, what the hell is that? And it's moving quick, and you're like, that's just a bunch of birds. And as you come up on them in the fog, you see all these birds taking off. The radar picks them up as a group, as a blob, not as individuals. So you send in a whole bunch of drones close together. Guess what happens? The radar sees them as a blob, not as individuals. So can you take out individuals? Yeah. And then they're going to do weird things. Some of them are going to go one direction, the other direction. So the bottom line is this: an air defense network gets confused and overwhelmed by a layered offensive attack, and of course, ultimately, it will run out of missiles, and at that point, you're now naked, and your opponent, you're now out of missiles. Your opponent can pummel you at will, and I think on the Russian border, anything that NATO tries puts it at such a great disadvantage, particularly in light of the fact that it's so short on equipment that it's trying to put equipment in the Asia. It's trying to, its equipment is being worn out and blown up and torn to pieces and overused in the Middle Eastern theater. And they've sent so much stuff to Ukraine and it's got destroyed that they're not. The NATO, the fear for NATO troops is not that they're a credible military threat in Ukraine. It's that they could get blown up, and then the West could say, "I want to commit suicide. We're going to start throwing nukes, and then the nukes are going to come back, and then we'll commit suicide." So the only option, really, at this point, if you think about it, the U.S. empire cannot fight a ground war. Doesn't have the people, and it can't light up a draft because it'll crumble from the inside. So they don't have the ground troops. They don't have the ground capabilities. They don't have the ground equipment that has been ground up in Ukraine. They can't do that. They cannot capably protect themselves from an aerial onslaught by a regional peer power, not just a world peer power like China and Russia, a regional peer power like Iran. They cannot adequately protect themselves because their missiles are too expensive. And a regional peer power, anybody who's attacking a U.S. defended installation now, the only thing they have to do is overwhelm the air system, integrated air system, make sure they shoot out all of their missiles, and then finish them off. Then they're naked. They can't defend themselves. So the only thing left for NATO, the only thing left for the West is nuclear deterrent, as we say, but that guarantees defeat. So the only question would be how they would choose defeat. So bottom line is, when it comes to sending troops to Ukraine, I'll finish by saying this. U.S. empire just doesn't have the options. They don't have the equipment. They can't send the number of troops and the amount of equipment that they would need use to be able to send to adequately assert any kind of a military force in Ukraine. Basically, I'll put it like this. What they would be able to do in Ukraine militarily is the equivalent of Israel sending a couple of quadcopters that look like this thing right here to over Iran. That's the equivalent. Given the power of Russia, it's basically their troops would be the equivalent of a couple of quadcopters that Russia would laugh off. Russia would just, Russia wisely says, you're a nuclear power and we're a nuclear power. This is stupid. Something bad could go wrong and everybody could get nuked. So Russia's wise there. But as far as sending troops, I think one of the reasons that NATO is trying to send a few people here and there and advisors and what have you, notice one of the things the U.S. said is we're going to send advisors to our embassy. They literally said that we're going to send some more advisors to our embassy, knowing that the Russians will go by international law and they won't blow the hell out of the embassy, knowing that, should they show up, in any numbers on the battlefield, that they're going to get blown to hell. So right now, I think it's symbolic. They're trying to they're trying to bluff the Russians that they've got more than they've gotten. You've noticed you're not hearing anything else from Macron. They're trying to bluff the Russians. They're trying to bluff the world into thinking they're still tough. They're trying to bluff the American people and the politicians into thinking that they can drag this thing on further because Russia's weak and Ukraine has a chance. And we're watching in real time the collapse of an empire in a spectacular way. And Iran just punched a hole in the empire. I mean, isn't it interesting that the thought was that it'll be China and Russia that, the empire will engage with, when in fact they went to the Middle East and the Muslim civilizations are knocking the hell out of them or punching holes in them. Hamas, a bunch of guys on the ground with small arms, beating the hell out of the Israelis, beating them, beating the crap out of them. And certainly Hezbollah has demonstrated with 100,000 fighters and missile capabilities that Israel is no match for them. Israel knows they're no match for Hezbollah. Israel doesn't even have a military. Israel knows that if they engage Hezbollah, they've got to ask the United States to defend them. Israel knows right now they couldn't even engage Hamas without the U.S. coming to defend them. When they thought Iran was going to attack them, what did they do? The U.S. came in with its ships, with France, with the U.K. Planes. All of NATO had to come in to defend Israel. Why? Because Israel's not capable of defending itself militarily. That's what we've learned. That's what everybody around Israel has learned. The U.S. can't leave. If Israel stands, if it stands after this, the U.S. can't leave. They can't pull out of Israel. They can't pull their ships out of Israel. They can't pull anything out. Why? Because Israel is incapable of defending itself militarily. Think about that. The idea of military is you got this big giant military base that can intimidate people. They use the word deter, intimidate people. But now the truth is out. Israel can't even defend itself, much less intimidate anybody else. Game's over. And now Israel sending a couple of quadcopters to Iran has reduced itself to symbolic attacks. And it's not Israel. This is the U.S. This is all they could muster. This is all they could pull off. Symbolic attacks, symbolism. They're doing symbolic attacks in Ukraine. They're symbolically sending some troops. And right now they're doing in the South China Sea, they got dragging the Philippines around for some kind of a symbolic show of force. But they can't really hit anybody. That's all they can do. That's all they're good for. That's it. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'm getting ready to roll. Fiora Isabel. Is it Isabel or Isabel? I'm going to do her channel in about 6 minutes. So I better jump off. If you can find me, you can find me over there in very few short minutes. And make sure, if you can afford, whether it's Patreon, PayPal, buy me a coffee, whatever the case may be, if you can afford to help the channel, I appreciate it. So go to Rumble. If you can't, no problem. If you can't, don't worry about it. Just share this on all your social media platforms. Don't forget, go to Rockfin and follow me on Rockfin. Follow me on Rumble. Thanks a lot, everybody. Share this on all your social media platforms. Peace. I'm out.